36 years in the Army.
Yes.
That's incredible.
The reason I could get by with like no sleep and so much energy and creativity and drive and enthusiasm, I discovered is that I had a condition called hyperthymia. By the time I was 58, I went into full-blown mania, raging inferno, where I went basically into a state of madness. If you choose to get help, you can live a happy, healthy life, but the big deterrent is stigma.
So if someone's listening to this and they're really suffering, or they know someone's suffering, what should they do?
The key to my recovery has been...
Gregg, thanks so much for making the trek out here. Really, really appreciate it, and it's great to see you.
Mark, thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. So, 36 years in the Army.
Yes.
That's incredible. That's about half your life, probably.
Right. And plus, that doesn't count the 4 years at West Point, where you're actually an active duty soldier as well. So that it really is 40, but I don't count the
You don't count the West Point?
I don't count
Most of your
those.
peers probably would count that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's counted in your retirement package and everything like that.
Right.
Yeah. We have a lot to talk about. Like, I'm excited to dig into your book, Bipolar General. You have an esteemed career. Thank you for your service, sir.
You're welcome.
Incredible.
It was exciting, and I loved it.
Yes. I bet. Well, most careers are, like a heartbeat.
Right.
They got all sorts of ups and downs, so I imagine you got some stories to tell.
Yes.
Why don't we just start at the beginning? Like, what compelled you to go to West Point, and what was your kind of origin story that shaped the young Lieutenant Martin?
So I was born in Holbrook, Massachusetts, which is near Boston, and I grew up in a family with a strong military tradition. So my dad was in the Navy in World War II. All my uncles were in some service. So I always knew I wanted to go in the military at some point in my life, either as an enlisted or as an officer. And then when it came time to start applying for colleges, I had been a really successful student athlete leader all through, high school, junior high, et cetera. And so my mother, Tiger Mom, Irish, she really thought the academies were great, that's just what I needed to do, and the price was right. So I applied to all the academies, and the only one I got into was West Point. And so that's where I went, which really was perfect. It was just the right place for me in terms of the academics, the athletics, the leadership development. So went to West Point, and, at the beginning, I didn't like it very much, and I had to do an attitude adjustment. And
imagine how challenging that would be.
Yeah. So once I got in the right mindset and decided I am just going to do my very best at every task we do, every moment, every day, and be the best teammate I could to all my classmates, everything went great. I mean, that attitude just propelled me to a very successful time at West Point, made lots of really good friends. Got commissioned into the Army. I chose the engineers, which includes combat engineers, construction like the CBs, et cetera. Basically, I chose Germany to go to during the Cold War. I thought Germany would be really cool. Not only the main mission for the U.S. military against the Soviet Union, but also the chance to travel around and experience the culture.
What years is that? When did you graduate West Point, and what years were you in Germany?
Was at West Point from 75 to 79. And so I came in just after Vietnam ended, graduated, went to Army Ranger School, Airborne School, every school I could get to, then went to Germany and was a platoon leader and a company commander of combat engineers between, say, 1980 and 1985. So my formative years as a leader were in Germany, which was awesome. And we had a great wartime mission. We basically put in obstacle systems along the East German border to slow down and stop the Soviet tanks so we could kill them with our tanks and artillery and in close air support. So the engineers played a really key role because, it's basically you put these obstacles in that either slow down or channelize or make the enemy
What were
turn.
these obstacles? Like
Minefields, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire obstacles. And you wouldn't think that sounds like too much against tanks, but it is.
They would get all tangled up.
They
in the treads,
get tangled up. When they hit a tank ditch, they actually can't go through or over the tank ditch. They have to either fill it in, which slows them down, or build a hasty little mobile bridge. And all of those things slow them down so we can then bring in artillery on their heads. We know where they are, and so our tanks can then pinpoint them, kill them. And then, of course, we would have great close air support. So it was really a key role on the battlefield and a lot of fun. The other thing that we did is we put in protective emplacements where basically you just scoop out the earth so tanks can hide, and the only thing above the ground is the barrel of the tank. Same thing for artillery. So the artillery would be down under the ground, and the only thing that would be up above the ground would be the tube, which really protects them. And the same with infantry fighting vehicles. So that was a lot of fun. And in those days, the soldiers had a lot of problems, personal problems, finance problems, getting, medical things, getting their pay, their promotion, and all that kind of stuff. And so what I quickly learned is the thing that they needed most from their leader was to help them not only train for war and maintain the equipment and do all the logistical stuff, but to help them with their personal problems. And as a lieutenant, you have power. I mean, you can go into battalion headquarters or company headquarters and say, hey, look, we need to take care of Private Jones. Private Jones hasn't gotten paid in 2 months, and, let's fix it. And so when I found that I worked hard for the troops, they would do anything for me because they knew you cared about them. And then the other thing that was really interesting is in my platoon of 40 combat engineers, I had about 10 guys who were convicted felons.
No kidding.
Because we were at the beginning of the all-volunteer force,
right.
And it wasn't going so well. There weren't that many people volunteering. And so they had this program where they would let felons, no rapists, no murderers, no violent crimes, but they would let them serve in the Army, and if they served honorably, their sentence would be commuted, and they could be free again. So these guys were really interesting characters. They were quiet, they kept a low profile, they didn't want to get noticed, and they worked really hard to do their job so that they would get
they
a
didn't
clean...
want to go back to prison.
That's right.
That brings up an interesting story, if you don't mind me
Sure.
just telling a story, because my dad served a whopping 4 years, I think, in the Army. He, too, is in Germany in the 50s in a unit called the 11th Airborne. If you ever heard of the 11th Airborne, It was disbanded. I think this is before we were so worried about the Soviet threat. So this is more about the tail end of rebuilding Germany and, whatnot. And so that 11th Airborne didn't have a great mission. The reason he was in the Army is because he got drunk one night and drove his car into a fraternity house. And he was at Union College, and the judge said, okay, Lees, you can either A, go to jail, or B, join the Army. He goes, B, found himself in the 11th Airborne. He wasn't a convict, but he was darn near close to it. And he did not have a good time. Interesting. So that infused my original thinking about the military. And I didn't grow up thinking I would be a military guy because it wasn't something we talked about. I didn't have a rich military history like you did. Right. Yeah, so my path to the SEALs was a little different. Hi, Mark Devine here from SEAL Fit. After 2 years of development, I'm super stoked to announce the launch of SEAL Fit supplements and our first product, SEAL Fit Electro Greens. This is the highest quality organic greens you can find, combined with electrolytes into one powerful supplement. Take with 8 ounces of water in the morning or add to your smoothie to get your day kicked off right with the proper nutritional supplementation and hydration support. And you can also use it as a pick-me-up booster during the day or after a workout. It dissolves immediately, and believe it or not, it tastes great. I've had many testimonials already saying it's the best tasting greens that they have ever tried. So, hoo-yah, SealFitSupplements.com, or you can find it on Amazon by searching for SealFit Electro Greens. Hoo-yah. Let's do this. Divine out. That is delicious. So let's go back. You've already hit on a few key leadership principles. One, taking care of the guys, keeping your eyes on them. If you can help them with personal problems, it keeps their mind in the game. The institution is not going to do it for them. Like most people are probably surprised to hear that, you could go for months not getting paid, like a simple glitch in the system, and the bureaucracy moves like pond water, right? And so this poor guy, right, that happens really frequently. It even happened in the SEAL teams. I remember times where I couldn't get paid. I'm like, what's going on? You need to advocate for the smallest of things, right? So that's one. What are some of the other kind of like major leadership lessons from those early years?
I think training was super important. It would start off in the morning. I lived on a German farm, and I would run 4 miles into work, and then I would basically put the platoon and then later the company through a really tough PT session, physical training. I was always the best athlete in the best shape of anybody in the unit. And so by being that, you instantly earned a lot of respect from the troops. And so I'd put them through that, and then we would train hard all day, do equipment maintenance. Then I would play basketball at lunch, and I would usually be, it was pretty much all black guys except for me. And so, I mean, they really would take their shots against me, as a lieutenant and, a white guy. That was really good too. That was another thing that sort of earned respect that, once you're out there on the court, I mean, there was no rank, obviously. And then I would work all day until my mission was done. Whatever I had to get done, I would just stay and work into the night. And then I'd run home, 4 miles back home to the farm I lived and then do farm chores. They had a restaurant there, and I would actually work in the kitchen. I mean, I was only getting, and then I would go to bed probably. Then my friends would pick me up, the other friends from the unit, and we'd go out and party. Germany was a great place to have fun. I mean, great beer. I mean, live music all the time, dancing, it was just wonderful. And so I wouldn't get to bed till like 1 o'clock in the morning. And the next morning I would get up and do farm chores and then run to work again and do the same thing all over again. And what I later, since, basically in writing this book, I discovered is that I had a condition called hyperthymia. I was born with a bipolar brain, lived on the bipolar spectrum. And what hyperthymia is...
But you didn't know that.
I had no idea.
No clue. Okay.
But the reason I could get by with like no sleep and so much energy and creativity and drive and enthusiasm was that what hyperthymia does is it's not bipolar disorder, but it's a low level of continuous mild mania. Mm-hmm. So what that means is the brain
always on.
The brain's making extra dopamine and endorphins. And so I had no idea I had this, but it gave me a tremendous boost and it elevated my performance, from high school on all the way through the Army. But what was happening is little by little, I was climbing the bipolar spectrum until by the time I was 47, I had my actual onset of bipolar disorder.
Can you be bipolar with hyperthymia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
that's interesting.
If you have hyperthymia, you're really kind of fortunate because it gives you
Sounds like it warded it off for a long time.
It did. And it gives you sort of this natural chemical-based high that is amazing. And so, I mean, I was always happy, enthusiastic, tons of energy, tons of drive, very creative, able to solve complicated problems, really quickly. And but the problem with hyperthymia,
there's got to be a debt there.
Is you're inching year by year, decade by decade, up the spectrum towards actual bipolar disorder and real mania, which is exactly what happened to me.
Is that because of an imbalance in hormones, or what's causing that inching?
What's causing it is that the brain, it's called the kindling effect, is one scientific term. And what it means is that if you have hyperthymia, every time in your life that you have a little event that's bipolar in nature, it's like putting a little piece of kindling on your brain, and it starts burning hotter. The flame gets a little bigger.
So you're going to experience both spectrums a little bit more and more and more.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And more kindling wood gets put on this little bipolar mini fire. And then instead of little kindling, it becomes sticks and then, huge logs. And so by the time I was 58, I went into full-blown mania, raging inferno, where I went basically into a state of madness, insanity, at which point I was, fired from my job as a 2-star, forced to retire, and then later hospitalized.
Wow. Okay, so back up here. Define bipolar for a listener who may have heard the word 1,000 times, thinks they know what it is, but maybe they're not on the target.
So bipolar disorder is what they call a mood disorder, meaning that the brain sort of takes it on its own initiative to produce more chemicals like dopamine, endorphins, and others what drives you into a state of mania. And then the same brain decides, okay, I'm tired of being manic. I'm going to underproduce and underdistribute those same powerful chemicals, which then drives you into depression. And it used to be called manic depressive illness, which is really a very accurate name for it because you fluctuate between, mania, and the characteristics of mania are grandiosity, where like I thought I was the smartest person in the world. I held the key to world peace. Religiosity, where you become absolutely over the top with regard to religious activities and beliefs and so forth, which I was. I was doing 30 plus significant religious events per week when I was in my 50s across 4 different churches. I mean, it was wild. I mean, my life was revolved around it. Other things, you don't need much sleep. When I was in full-blown mania, I went about 3 months with no sleep. And prior to that, I was maybe getting an hour or 2 or 3.
Like no sleep at all.
Yeah, none.
Naps.
I nothing. I didn't sleep for 3 months.
What?
And you think about what that does to the brain. Basically, it's because I was manic, and then as you get no sleep, you become more manic. And so it's a spiral upward.
Yeah, I mean, sleep deprivation is used to drive, prisoners nuts.
Right, which I was.
Wow.
The other thing is you make very reckless decisions and you spend, lots of money that you don't really have to spend. Like I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on religious activities, pursuits, causes without saying anything to my wife. So she was not happy.
I can imagine.
Another.
I was going to ask you, when did you get married?
We got married in 1982.
Okay.
And I met her in Germany on a blind date. And so,
so she rode all the good years with you. Then
right.
She started to see this behavior. And
some other aspects of mania, incredible energy, just drive, creativity, the brain. Like when I was in, just for example, Iraq, and I commanded about 10,000 troops during, the first year, I could see and anticipate. My brain was like a high-speed computer and solve the problems, these complicated problems, before anybody else knew there was a problem. Mm-hmm. And, so just this...
Sounds like the limitless drug.
It is. It was amazing.
That's incredible.
But then when you go into depression, it's the opposite. Withdrawn, no energy, confused, indecisive, no interest in anything, wanting to die, becoming suicidal, all these different trends. So mania is the upside, depression is the low side. And so bipolar disorder, going back to the original question, you generally cycle between the two. I was lucky.
How long would they last?
For me, my manias would last from, at first they lasted for almost a full year. And when I was in my hyperthymic state, I was high with only one depressive episode from, I would say, high school through the first time I can remember any depressive symptoms was when I was about in my early 40s. So I was high that whole time for decades. And then once the bipolar disorder kicked in at age 47 in 2003, I was in Iraq. Once that kicked in, I was mostly manic, but I did dip into depression. And then after about 11 years of mostly mania, I fell into 2 years of severe crippling depression, which I call bipolar hell. And then I finally pulled out of it when I got on the right medication.
Wow. Okay. So is it just strictly a biological hormonal thing that determines when you shift from manic to depressive or depressive to manic, or can it be life circumstances, or are there certain trigger? What triggers the transition?
All of the above.
All of the above.
The way scientists and psychiatrists explain bipolar disorder and the onset of it is that you have to have the genetic predisposition, which I obviously have, and then it takes some sort of a triggering event, something, very stressful, traumatic, really pressurized. And for me, according to the VA and the Army Medical Department, both of which did independent studies on how did this general get bipolar disorder?
How did he pass through the system?
How did this happen?
He's a 2-star general, right?
They were really interested in figuring it out. So they both did independent studies, and it included interviews with me, interviews with other people, et cetera. And they came to the conclusion that it was the triggering event was the Iraq War, the high intensity preparation, and then, the high intensity thrill, which for me, the war was, I didn't find it traumatic. I thought it was thrilling. I was euphoric. I loved it. I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life. It was the high point of my life. But even that can be enough to trigger it. So all of that triggered it at age 47. So it's the genetic predisposition, which I had, and then the triggering event that caused the onset of the bipolar disorder. And then your other question is, how do you go from mania to depression and back again? First off, the bipolar brain it's a sickness, it's a disease or an illness inside the brain, whereby the brain sort of has its own rhythm independent of what else is going on internally or inside your own mind. Like you may want to slow down and not be manic, but once the brain decides to go into mania, it's going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen.
You don't have the willpower to override it.
You can't.
You can't do it.
Because it's a physical, biological thing inside the wiring and, the neurons and the chemistry and all that stuff. And then the same thing, you may not want to go into depression, but that lack of those chemicals drives you into depression. And then to your other point, external things can play a role. Like, for example, let's say you get into real severe legal trouble or financial trouble, you go broke, or you get fired from your job, or your spouse dies. Those can, also trigger a depressive episode and drive you down into depression. The difference is that we all have ups where we feel happy and enthusiastic and things are going well, and we all have downs, the blues, a bad day, things aren't going, I'm not really happy. But the difference is the degree. And so what the medical community has done is come up with this manual called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. DSM-5. And it lays out specific criteria for what constitutes depression and mania. And so when you read those, what it takes to be manic or depressed, they're far beyond the normal, I'm having a bad day kind of thing.
Right. What about self-care? Exercise, obviously you do that. Alcohol. I mean, what do people do for self-care if they're either in denial or maybe not recognizing the bipolarness? And so of the self-care, what is positive? And obviously, things like alcohol, what is destructive? And will any of it work?
So self-care is incredibly important. And I'm doing a good job on my self-care now because I pulled out of the bipolar hell 8 years ago. I've had a few small incidents, not major, and I've been able to recognize those, take steps to kind of correct. But
do you catch it on the descent, you're saying? Or on the ascent, you catch it before it gets out of control?
Yes.
And you're able to rebalance.
It's both going up and going down. Okay. And so I'm able to work through it and come out of it okay. So once I got out of high school and was no longer living at home, I sort of turned into kind of a wild man. And I mean, I partied a lot. I drank a lot, mostly beer. I didn't sleep much at all because I figured I have time to sleep when I die. And there's too much.
I had a girlfriend tell me that once.
Yeah, and there's
you sleep when you're dead. Get back to work.
There's too much to do to spend much time sleeping. And the other thing that happened was once I got out in the Army, I got really serious about it. I loved it. I loved everything about it. The mission, taking care of the troops, the adventure, the fun, the danger, the excitement. Everything about it made me happy. And I threw myself into it, 110%. So I was really into my Army job. My mother, when I was in my 20s, she said, Gregg, you're going to get very unhealthy and bad things are going to happen to you. Your health is going to go down because, number one, you don't get enough sleep. You need to get 8 hours a night. And I was getting, maybe 3, 4, 5 at the most. And that went for years and decades. And as I got older, closer to bipolar disorder, I even got less sleep. Then she said, number 2, you party and drink too much. And we have alcoholism in the family, and the alcohol is going to kill you. And then the third thing is you take your job way too seriously. You work late at night. You're in on the weekends. You're taking phone calls. You're so dedicated. And then, you don't read like books normal people read. You're reading, military stuff. And she said, you have to back off a little because if you drop dead tomorrow, the Army would bury you and then some new guy would come in, take your spot, and nobody would miss you at all. And my mom was absolutely right.
Oh,
she was totally right. And so those are all elements of what what you said about self-care. If I had started doing that at an earlier age and had, hobbies outside the military, drank less, slept more, I mean, there's a chance I never would have actually had a bipolar onset.
But that hypothermia prevented that, right? Like if you didn't have that, then maybe you would have been able to do some of the rebalancing. It sounds like that kept you going 100 miles an hour all the time.
Yes, you're right. It did. And that was obviously in my case, the precursor to bipolar disorder.
Right. Is that common in people, or is that common in people with bipolar?
Yeah, I would say there's a fair amount of it. I don't know the number. I don't know what percent. That'd be a good figure to know, but I don't know.
And how common is bipolar in general? So your friend Serena was saying that it's probably a lot more prevalent than is widely understood.
Yes, I think it's much higher than what is put out there. So what you read in the literature is that about 3 to 4% of the population live with bipolar disorder.
Diagnosed.
Yes. I think it's probably much higher than that because a lot of people don't know they have it. Or if they do think there's something wrong, they don't go get medical help because of the stigma and they don't get a diagnosis. So I think it's quite a bit higher. Here's one for you. I read a statistic that startled me until I began to study it, that in the veteran community, it's as high as 25% of U.S. veterans live with bipolar disorder.
Wouldn't that mean that 25% of the active duty population has it as well?
Probably.
Yeah.
It probably does. And then Joe Votel, who was the commander of Special Ops Command,
I remember, yeah.
Votel wrote a blurb in my book, and he called bipolar disorder one of the signature injuries of the post 9/11 wars. And I asked him, what do you mean by that? Like, I'd never heard anybody say that before. And he said, bipolar disorder is extremely common across the military and especially in special operations. First off, people with the predisposition for bipolar disorder are unusually attracted to the military in general and the special ops even in particular. And then, so they've already got a lot of the traits, the genetic predisposition. A lot of them are probably already hyperthymic. And then what happens? You come in the military, or especially something like the SEALs, in immediate stress, pressure, trauma. And so the triggering event is right there when they walk in the door. Then there's deployments. Then there's combat. And so, it just goes up, up, up. And what a lot of special operators have said is that, who have studied bipolar disorder and who have been diagnosed, that it's going into mania, that, a controlled mania, a high productive mania, not where you're mad and you're out of your mind, but that controlled, high performing mania gives them the surge to go over the top, to do the most dangerous things, and to have that incredible drive and courage and fearlessness to do what, most normal humans would never even dream about doing, let alone accomplish. I think that all of those things probably lead to a higher level of bipolar disorder in the military in general and probably in special ops. And then if they do have a disorder, they generally don't go to get help because they're afraid of the stigma. They're afraid it'll end their career. So a lot of them hold off to get diagnosed. Like, I've got a really good friend who was special ops. He said many of his, colleagues or, fellow special operators, they held off until they retired. They got their 20 years in, and then they went and got help and got a diagnosis and are on the meds and are at the VA now. So it's interesting, but when you really study the factors that go into all this, it's really not that surprising when you think about it.
So can TBI or PTS cause bipolar? What you just said made a lot of sense. So if you have the underlying condition, genetic predisposition, the stress and the drama is a triggering event. So that presumes they kind of had it and it was going to show up eventually. But what if none of that existed? Could TBI and post-traumatic stress or trauma stress actually create a bipolar situation?
That is a great question. I really don't know.
Because I would think, because the changes that happen in the brain and what happens with especially TBI, all of a sudden all your hormones get out of whack and everything just goes haywire. The brain changes. I could see how that be an interesting study.
Yeah, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it could or did.
Yeah. Another kind of fantasy question, back to that kind of idea of the limitless drug. I imagine the military would be really interested in figuring out how to capture that controlled mania and bottle it. Has there been any attempt to figure out how to activate that? I mean, of course, like flow state and, all the things we're doing there, but like in terms of a drug or some sort of intervention because that could be really helpful in combat.
It's hugely helpful. And I mean, I'm one of probably tens, hundreds of thousands of people who have benefited enormously from going into mania. Again, not off the charts mania, but a controlled, high productive
It's
mania.
like a competitive advantage.
It's a huge.
I didn't
huge,
have that. No wonder I wasn't as successful as you.
It is a huge competitive advantage. I don't know of any studies where the Army has tried to, sort of identify it, bottle it, and, put it into people.
It'd probably be the CIA, not the Army, right?
Yeah, probably. I will say that until mania gets too high and goes out of control, the military loves people who have those characteristics.
Yeah, they just call it being a good leader.
That's right. Good
Right.
leader, lots of drive, a lot of motivation, gung-ho,
Gung-ho.
whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Hoo-ah, spirit, all that
Exactly.
stuff. And so like for me, every efficiency or evaluation I got from second lieutenant on, even going back to West Point, even going back to high school, it always said most energetic, most enthusiastic, most driven person we've ever seen. Every single one.
Just magnifies all the good qualities. That's
It really did.
How often does severe alcohol abuse or alcoholism accompany bipolar behavior?
I would say alcohol is a factor. In fact, drugs and alcohol can be the triggering event. So they can actually activate the genetic predisposition. It was really interesting. When I was really manic and was in full-blown mania, I just wanted to drink alcohol. When I was in full-blown mania, I was drinking like 10, 12 drinks a night and didn't get drunk at all, like zero. And when I would drink...
You probably just did that to feel normal.
Yeah, what it would do to me is when I was manic, I wanted to drink, and when I drank, I got more manic, and then I wanted to drink more. And so it was this upward vicious cycle. And then the same thing happened when I came back from Iraq, and during the year in Iraq, which was, very, very intense in every way. I got back to Germany and, the adrenaline's gone, not in Iraq anymore. I sunk and plunged into this 10-month-long depression. And I went in and told the doctors on more than one occasion, said, hey, I'm really depressed. I think there's something wrong with me because I'm normally, energetic and extroverted, and now I'm introverted, no energy, no interest. And so they asked me, they said, well, how do you deal with it? What are your methods to deal with this? I said, well, number one, I try to do really intense PT, physical training, but it's very hard when you're depressed because you don't have the energy or the willpower. And then I said, number two, I listen to really intense rock and roll music, lifts my spirits. Third, I recite key power verses out of the Bible. There's all kinds, thousands of verses that are uplifting. And then fourth, I drink alcohol. And so the doctor said to me, he said, wow, sounds like you have everything under control. That's good care. And I look back now.
He even approved of number 4?
Yeah.
Wow.
Alcohol is really bad for depression because when you're depressed, and you want to drink to relieve the pain and suffering, you just go deeper into depression. And then you drink more and you get more depressed.
It's interesting because on the manic side, you said it made you more manic. I was curious about that. Because alcohol is a depression, you would think the alcohol would be to kind of moderate the mania somehow.
You would think so, but it would spin me up. When I would drink, then I had even less need for sleep. I would start sending in the evenings after my wife and son would go to bed. I couldn't sleep. So I'd start doing texts and emails, and I'd send out dozens and dozens of them. And then I would CC hundreds of people,
Oh, no.
many of whom had nothing to do with my command. They were
Right.
like zero. So the next morning, people go to work, and there's dozens of emails from, the boss, which of course was terrible leadership. Then I'd go out on power walks in Washington, D.C., or I'd go for a bike ride, or there was a 24-hour gym on base that I'd go to and, lift weights, work out. I had psychosis as well, which are hallucinations and delusions.
This is at the moment, right? You're talking about where it all came crashing down. So I'm glad I wanted to ask you a little bit more, what's that experience was like?
Yeah. So when I would go on these bike rides, I would ride my bike, 2, 3, 4 in the morning all around Washington, D.C. I'd go up on Capitol Hill, which is the only hill, and I'd bomb down the hill as fast as I could. And I would hallucinate that I would fly up in the air on my bike and could fly over and around the monuments. So again, that's psychosis. But all of those things were happening during the months leading up to me getting fired.
Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, we have an awareness of how our actions are affecting those around us, like metacognition, let's just say. How was your metacognition? Was it offline during this? Did you have any sense that you were heading over a cliff? I mean, what was going on in your higher self?
Yeah, so my metacognition was really bad.
It sounds like it got shut off.
It was pretty terrible. I believed fervently that I was the smartest guy in the world. I mean, I'm not joking. I believed I held the key to world peace. I had a vision for a global security university that could spread world peace around the globe.
That's not a bad vision, by the way.
In my visions were what was interesting.
We should revive that one.
Right. But I was president of National Defense University, which is the highest level school in the entire Department of Defense.
Right.
My boss was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who I had worked for 4 different times and knew really well. So I saw him, probably every other month.
That was General Dempsey?
Yeah, Martin Dempsey, who was a fabulous
fabulous
guy, great boss, loved him to death. He probably saved my life when he, fired me. But I would see him routinely. He actually hired me to go into National Defense University and essentially transform the place, make it more relevant, more cutting edge, more forward thinking, more relevant to modern warfare. That's why he brought me in. And so I was doing it. Between him and I and others, we created this transformation plan. And then I was the guy that was to drive it through. And the mission he gave me, he said, hey, go in there, be a bulldog, break China, force this thing through, because we don't have that much time to do it. And they're going to try to slow roll you and, try to do everything possible to make this fail. So just go in there and, kick ass. And so then I would brief him on a regular basis. And the feedback up until the day I got fired, even the day I got fired, he told me I was doing a fantastic job. But the feedback was really, really good, very, very positive. He backed me up 100%. But I had very little awareness of how hard I was driving, not only myself and the university. I mean, I was pushing too hard. And I took a lot of my cues and incentives from the chairman, but I was going too fast. This transformation plan, instead of trying to do it in 2 years, this was a 5 or 10 year journey. I didn't have a good sense for that. All I knew was people were out against me. They didn't want to change. And so the harder they resisted, the harder I pushed and punched and, and drove things. So I would say not really good self-awareness. And there were people who tried to talk to me, say, slow down. You're pushing too hard. You're pushing too fast. There were leaked articles to the press that said I was a madman, I had gone crazy, things like that. And my higher-ups in the Pentagon just said, don't worry about it. That means you're doing a good job, because if they're going to the press, that's because you're pushing them. And so, yeah, Tom Ricks wrote some scathing articles about me, which of course he got all the info from people inside the university. What it really did, anytime there was sort of pushback or pressure against me, it made me push harder. And so again, I think my metacognition was poor. It wasn't good. I was basing my decision-making on a lot of lessons I had learned in the previous 35 years in the Army. And I don't think I took into account the sort of who my troops were. Professors, PhDs, former State Department, former CIA.
They weren't the grunts you had in Germany.
Yeah, I mean, these weren't a bunch of combat engineers, who are all dirty and ready to go blow stuff up. They were, sophisticated, very well-educated professionals who were entrenched in a system that they loved just the way it was, because they had carved out these little niches and, empires for themselves. And the last thing they wanted to do was change. It didn't matter if the mandate for change was coming from me or from the chairman or from the president. I mean, they really didn't care. They just weren't going to change. And then what was interesting is really nobody came to me and said, hey, I think you're out of control. I think you have something wrong with you. I think there's a mental problem or an emotional problem.
They looked at it just as a leadership issue, right? You're pushing too hard.
I think so. I think that's what it was. But what happened is near the end, in the spring, summer of 2014, the whole thing kind of blew up. And I went into a state of madness, insanity. They call it full-blown mania, where I just lost it.
Subjectively, what was that experience like, if you can remember it?
I was extremely happy, but then I would cycle into agitation anger, rage, extreme paranoia that people were out to get me. And they actually were out to get me fired because they thought I had completely lost it, which I had. I was mostly manic, but the mania has a couple different flavors. Most of my time in mania, I was happy, euphoric, super enthusiastic, loved everybody, was funny, was the life of the party, talked all the time. Oh, that's another thing about mania is you talk continuously, interrupt people. You're a fountain of never-ending, quote, good ideas. I mean, ideas just come pouring out of your head, and people can't keep up with it at all. Track of time. So I would swing between this happy mania and this angry, full of rage mania. And then I would also dip into sharp bouts of depression, but they didn't last. I would dive down deeply into depression, but boom, like an hour or two later, I'd be manic again.
Wow.
And they call that rapid cycling, where I was going rapidly between high mania, sharp depression, and then back. And that went on for months. And so my behavior was really erratic, out of control, over the edge. The beginning of the end was the faculty, the administration, and the students started writing anonymous letters to General Dempsey, the chairman, saying, hey, we love General Martin. He's a really good guy. He's very funny. He's the life of the party. There's always excitement wherever he goes. We've done a lot of great things, but here's what we've observed. And they were very scientific letters saying, they described my bipolar state very well. Now, some of them might have looked up in DSM-5, what the characteristics are
probably,
to give more credibility. But they wrote these letters, there are dozens and dozens of them. And so
imagine you were the talk of the coffee room.
Right.
Right. And so they collaborated and said, we got to have a campaign.
Yes, that's exactly right. So this was well orchestrated. And so what General Dempsey did, very fair, very good guy, cared about the university, cared about me, knew me well from previous, assignments. Mm-hmm. He did a series of assessments and investigations that, really drilled into and focused on, what's going on at NDU and with Gregg Martin. And he came to the conclusion that he said, I'm not a doctor or a psychiatrist, but something is really wrong. Gregg is suffering emotionally and mentally. And so he made the decision that for the good of the university and my personal good, he needed to get me out of there. And it was really great. I got a call on, it was a Friday afternoon.
It's really great. I got fired.
I got a call.
It was really great.
This is a good story, though. I got a call on a Friday afternoon from the Pentagon. It was in July of 2014, so almost about 10 years ago. And it said, report to the chairman's office Monday morning. I go, and I don't know whether he's going to promote me, fire me, extend me in command. I figured it was about an equal chance of either of them. But so I go in his office Monday morning. First person I see is the lawyer. I said, okay, no promotion.
Narrowed it down to choice B.
I'm out the door. And so Dempsey, he walks across his office. He gives me a big hug. He said, Gregg, I love you like a brother. You've done an unbelievable job at NDU. I give you an A+. No one could have done what you did in just 2 years. But your time is over. You have until 5 p.m. today to resign or I will fire you. And even I was smart enough to know there's a huge difference between resigning from command and getting fired. And it has to do with pay, rank, all kinds of stuff. So I listened to him and he said, the other thing, I'm ordering you to get a psychiatric evaluation this week at Walter Reed. What are your questions? I said, no questions. Thank you, sir. This is great news because God put me here to do big things, and now he's going to put me somewhere else to do even bigger things. What's amazing is 10 years later, I was right. Because this mental health advocacy is the most important work I've ever done. And General Dempsey was just looking at me like, and by the way, he wrote the foreword to the book, and it's a great foreword that, he really explains things and, is very encouraging, supportive, positive about the whole thing.
Tell us about the recovery. And so, with an ear for people listening going, oh, wow, I hear myself in Gregg's story. Where do I go? Like, what could they expect to experience? What was your experience in recovery?
What happened with me was when I got fired, I was at peak mania, full-blown mania. But you don't stay at mania forever. And so I started to spiral, and what goes up must come down. And so I was super high, so I was going to go super low. And over the next few months, I spiraled, then crashed into hopeless, crippling depression with terrifying psychosis of my own death. By the way, I got evaluated 3 times at Walter Reed, and 3 times they said, "You're fine. There's
No
nothing
way.
wrong with you." So that made a total of 6 times the military medical people got it wrong. 3 times when I was in depression, 3 times in mania. But anyway, I crashed into crippling depression, and this was in November of 2014. And I went back to the doctor, same doctor, and said, "Hey, doc, there's really something wrong with me. I am so depressed. I can hardly get out of bed. I have no energy. I'm not interested in anything, etc." And my wife, which provided what they call collateral information, which is really important. If they'd have gotten collateral information from, friends,
Right.
family,
The 360.
they could have diagnosed me years earlier and saved a lot of, because this almost killed me. So the doctor, my wife said, he's really depressed now, but before he was manic. And the doctor asked a few questions, and then all of a sudden the light went on in his head, and he said, depression, mania, sounds like bipolar disorder. So he diagnosed me that day with bipolar disorder type 1, which is mostly high-level mania. And when he diagnosed me, I gave him a big hug, and I said, "Thank you, doctor. I knew there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was. Now you've given me a target with a face on it that I can go after and do battle with." And I made a decision right then and there in the depths of depression. I said, I am not going to be stigmatized. I'm not going to be ashamed or embarrassed because I know this stuff is physical. It's biological. I'm not going to do that. And so that was some good news on that terrible day. But I then just went from bad to worse. So I went into about 2 years of intense, crippling depression, terrifying psychosis, passive suicidal ideations, hospitalization.
Meaning you didn't act on them.
Right.
Okay.
What passive means, when you have an active suicidal ideation, you want to kill yourself. When you have a passive ideation, it means you want somebody or something else to kill you and just end it.
Put you out of your misery.
But you don't have the desire to put a gun to your head and actually end it. And so I actually had these passive ideations, which I found out at the VA what they were and how dangerous they are. And they're so dangerous because a passive ideation can morph into an active ideation just in a heartbeat. And then you do develop a plan, you do kill yourself, and you're dead. That was the key criteria where the VA admitted me to their inpatient ward. So I kept going into further depression, and the inpatient stay, I spent 2 weeks in the locked ward and then 6 more weeks living in the hospital, undergoing intensive therapy and rehab. And that was good. It sort of kept me from getting worse, but I didn't get better until they gave me the right medication, which really proved to me how important the chemical balance in the brain is. I couldn't get better because my brain was messed up. But once I got the right medication, it was a combination of 3, primarily lithium, which is a natural salt, and then Lamictal and Latuda, the 3 of them together. Once I had that combination, the symptoms went away, like in less than a week.
Now, is that your combination, or is that combination that works for any bipolar?
Mine. Everybody's brain chemistry is different.
I see.
The combination that I have for bipolar type 1 is not an unusual or unorthodox combination, but for
The amounts might vary depending on the
That's
person.
right.
Yeah.
Or they may put some other type of medication in there. There's no formula that says, okay, this is exactly what's going to make you better. They try something and they wait and see, is this working? Like they tried 2 really good medications, Lamictal and Latuda. They tried those. I was out taking those for over a year with no positive effect. But once I went on lithium, I got better in just days.
Wow.
It was
That
unbelievable.
must have been such a relief.
So that was 8 years ago. So you asked what's the self-care? How do you get out of it? So I basically decided I need to rebuild my life, rebuild my marriage, rebuild my family, rebuild everything. Because I was
Remarkable that your wife hung in there.
Oh, I
through all
know.
this.
And the key, and she talks about it, there's a piece in the book by her, and she said the main reason why she hung in there was that I always wanted to get better and never gave up. And, that if I didn't quit and wanted to get better, then she wasn't going to quit. And so, yeah, I'm really lucky that, that I married her and she stuck with me. The key to my recovery has been number one, have to get the brain chemistry straight, which for me was through medication. And I think that's true for the vast majority of people. Number two, therapy is really important, to sit down and talk to a trained psychotherapist to help you understand your triggers, how to live a healthy life, what to do if you run into trouble, talk through problems, how to deal with your thoughts, the metacognition, all that. Thirdly is live a really healthy lifestyle. So, healthy diet, lots of exercise, plenty of sleep, 8 hours at least.
And you're able to sleep now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have
Okay,
no
good.
trouble sleeping. And I take a fitness nap in the afteron
All right.
for 30
Fitness
minutes.
Nap. I like that one. I might borrow that.
It's,
Go get your workout.
naps are actually really
Naps
good.
are awesome. Yeah.
And then plenty of water, low stress,
you cut down to 6 beers from 12.
So I'm way down. I'm like, either no alcohol or maybe one, at the most two. And so that healthy lifestyle is really, really important. So those three elements, medication, therapy, healthy lifestyle, are necessary but not sufficient to have a recovery that's built to last. They've got to be anchored into what I call the 5 Ps. And the 5 Ps are, number one, purpose. You have to have a purpose for your life. And being military guys, we always had a mission, a purpose. But once you get out, you don't have it anymore.
Huge. I think that right there is a big one for a lot of our vets who are suffering, because they leave their mission, their team, and their purpose.
Yes.
And they don't have a clue what they're going to do. And then they go into this dark, depressive state.
And so it took me a while to develop a purpose. It wasn't quick and it wasn't fast. I had to think about it, talk to mentors, experienced people. But I finally came up with my purpose, which is sharing my bipolar story to help stop the stigma, promote recovery, and save lives. I mean, that's my driving purpose. That drove me to write this book and give all these talks and come to San Diego to see you. The second thing is people. Surrounding yourself with a network of fun, happy, energetic people.
Positive people.
That you love to be around. So I've got that in Cocoa Beach. Mm-hmm. And I've got a dancing group.
Nice.
We do line dancing with really fun music. It's a blast. Fitness classes, sing karaoke, all that stuff. It's great. The third thing is place. I think living in a place that makes you happy and lets you do what you want to do. Like you obviously have picked San Diego. It's a wonderful place.
We talked before we started about the positive triggers of living in the sunshine and weather and healthy people. You have that in Cocoa Beach. Everyone who lived up in Washington, they're all depressed during the winter and they're all happy in the summer, the few days that it's sunny. So interesting.
Place. And then 4th P is perseverance. Recovering from mental illness, like lots of other maladies, is really hard. I mean, you have to have a fighting spirit. You have to want to recover, because you're going to have downturns and episodes, and you might have a relapse, which luckily I've not had a relapse. I have had probably half a dozen episodes, which are concerning and, dangerous, but they never turned into a full-blown relapse. But you gotta, never quit, keep going, keep pushing forward. And I think being military people gives an advantage on that. I mean, when you think about pushing through, I was never, a special operator, but did get to go to Ranger School and, things like that where it's just grit and, just don't quit, just keep going. And then finally, the 5th one, and you brought it up earlier, is I call it perspective. In perspective, I define as the ability to objectively get outside your own head and do metacognition. And just a little simple example, like let's say I get a thought that, such and such a person is thinking and talking bad about me. They're out to get me. They want to hurt me. Now I can say, wait a second. Not only is that not true, that person's not thinking about me at all. They're thinking about themselves or their own job or their family. And so I think those 5 Ps are really critical. And I've worked very hard on those as part of my recovery. And it's every single day. And I think having a routine, a structured life where you're doing stuff in a structured, disciplined way is really important. Going to bed at the same time every night. Take your fitness nap at the same time, go to the gym at the same time, take your beach walk or your bike ride, do your line dancing.
Yeah, that structure holds everything together.
It keeps it together.
That last P sounds a lot like some meditative practice. How do you practice that contextual awareness?
So first off, prayer. And my prayer life is pretty brief compared to how it used to be. But I mean, like, waking up in the morning, just first thing, thanking God for, hey, I'm alive.
Right?
I'm in this cool house. I'm in Cocoa Beach. I've got a beautiful, great wife who, still loves me, and I love her. I mean, that's great. You have 3 kids that are terrific. I have all these friends. Like, I'm so blessed. I mean, having this attitude of gratitude is really, really important. If I have, it's interesting. In the last month or so, I had an adjustment in medication, and I went into depression for just short periods of time, like a day or two. But when I was in this depressed state, I had no energy. I couldn't hardly get out of bed. I had no willpower. All that was bad. But it made me even more grateful for the blessings that I had. And it made me, I said, how did
Because you had those 5 P's in place.
Yes.
Right.
And I said, what worked for me before? It was this structure. So I got back I got back on my feet, everything, and I've been good ever since. The prayerfulness is really good, the gratitude. Another one is doing a devotional. So I have this little devotional that is like, it's all positive stuff about God and,
It's like an affirmation or a mantra?
It's really kind of an affirmation thing. I do sort of a religious mantra that I sort of say to myself. I don't do it as long as I should or spend as much time, but I do that. And then this breathing is really good. Deep breathing, hold the breath, count, let it out. Once it's out, count again to, a certain number. And I think that deep breathing does a lot for the brain, for the organs, for the, total well-being. So those are a few things that I do. But actually, I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the things I really want to improve in is my mindfulness, my meditation. I do yoga every day on my own. That's an area that I need to do better on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're doing incredible in all areas. So that's just a little fine tuning there.
Okay.
But yoga is, I look at yoga. I've been doing yoga since 1999, doing breathing and meditation since I was 21.
Oh, that's
in fact,
awesome.
I credit that for why I went into the SEALs, because I developed the metacognition to see that I was heading down the wrong path as a CPA, MBA, merchant. I was meant to be a warrior. All that came from the meditation bench.
Wow.
So, but yoga it's like a meta practice, because it includes breath, it includes meditation, it includes movement. And the movement that, people at our age need, spinal health, right? That's big. Organ health. So yoga is not exercise. I highly encourage you to take more of that up and to combine those elements into that practice, which packs a really powerful punch. Just 20 minutes a day is all you need, right? Don't even need to go to a class. Serena can teach you.
Hey, sounds good.
She's on it. This is incredible. So your book, Bipolar General, came out in September. My Forever War with Mental Illness. You're not at war anymore. Sounds like, General, you can lay down your sword.
So the reason I chose that title is, bipolar, because I live with bipolar disorder. It will never go away, which is why I call it a forever war, that it just, once you're in it, it won't go away. I would say that the bipolar disorder it's contained in my brain right now. It's like it's kind of in a cage.
You get a peace dividend if you manage it.
Yes.
Got it.
But it's still in there. And if I don't take care of myself with all the things we just talked about, it can come bursting out of there like a wild lion and destroy me again, and lead to all kinds of terrible things, including suicide, of which people with bipolar disorder commit suicide or die by suicide at 40 times the average population. So that was the title. And the idea of Bipolar General, I thought, hey, I have bipolar disorder, I am a general, why not just throw it all out there?
Right. Because most people aren't going to think that, you could make it to 2-star general with such a debilitating issue. So that's powerful use of that, by the way. I would applaud the use of the title
I even wonder, speculation, would I have gone as far in the military as I did without bipolar disorder? And I think the answer is probably no.
Interesting.
Because when you think about, there are literally tens of thousands of incredibly successful people in all walks of life who live with bipolar disorder, including lots of military people, artists, business people, entertainers, you name it, politicians. I don't think I would have gone quite as high without it.
Right. I mean, just for some reason, I was thinking about Robin Williams. He was bipolar, right? And he couldn't get himself out of the depths of despair.
Right.
It's unfortunate. So if someone's listening to this, besides going and buying the book, and they're really suffering, or they know someone's suffering, what should they do?
If a person has the awareness that they're suffering, then they should on their own go seek professional medical help, go in and get evaluated and try to deal with it themselves. That's unusual. What usually happens is people don't know they have a problem. Other people can see it, but they can't. So what's really important is, like in the military, in the general population, people need to be trained on what are the most common mental illnesses and what are the characteristics. Like, what does it look like? So bipolar disorder, what are the key elements of mania, depression? So that, not to train them into being a psychiatrist, but just like about as much as we know about first aid or physical fitness or healthy diet. Everybody needs a peer support person who can be trusted and is their confidant and their buddy. In the military, we call it a battle buddy. Everybody needs that. And so what the peer support or battle buddy really needs to do is, if they see something, they should go have this hard conversation and say, hey, look, Mary or, Joe, I really care about you. And here's some of the things I've noticed. I'm concerned. Let's go see a medical professional. I'll go with you. And we can take, your spouse or a family member, but let's go see a doctor or a therapist or a social worker or somebody who's professionally trained in this stuff. And they can evaluate you and see if they think something is wrong. If there is, if you get a diagnosis, embrace it. Embrace it, own it, take charge of it, learn about it. And so you can start getting better and recover and live a happy, healthy, purposeful life. But if they say you're okay, then that's good news too, because then you're all right. But your choices are get help or don't. And if, like with bipolar disorder, if a person does not get help, they're going to likely go down a path of destruction where their marriage will be ruined, their family, their career, their finances. They'll often end up homeless, addicted, in prison, and die some kind of violent death, either at their own hands or by somebody else, or get shot by a police officer. And so that's the bad news. But if you choose to get help, you can live a happy, healthy life that's full of purpose, and you can have a wonderful time. But the big deterrent is stigma. And stigma is based on fear and ignorance. And there's no place for it at all. Because when you think about it, there's no stigma against somebody with diabetes or cancer or heart disease. But people with mental illness or mental health issues, there's a stigma that's really based on, again, ignorance. My vision for the stigma on mental illness is, the example would be breast cancer. If you go back to the 1970s, breast cancer was stigmatized. It was embarrassing, shameful. Nobody talked about it until First Lady Betty Ford got breast cancer, talked about it, laid out the facts. So it took a while, but now look at how our culture has changed. 50 years later, during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, National Football League players wear pink ribbons, pink socks, pink shoes, and women fighting breast cancer are seen as heroic warriors battling this terrible disease. And I think the same should be true of mental illness.
Yeah, I agree with that. Within the military, you've been doing a lot of talks and presentations. If someone either through their own means or through their battle buddy says, oh geez, yeah, there's a problem here, and they get diagnosed and they get stabilized, can they keep their career, or is it right? Where's the military at with that?
So each case is different. The way I see it is, in the last 20 years, especially the post 9/11 wars, because of the stress and the deployments, all the PTSD and the traumatic brain injuries and depression, the military has improved a lot.
Yes.
Their understanding has gone way up. The amount of resources and training that's put into it is tremendously improved. That's the good news. So I sat on a panel. This is one of many. But you had mostly enlisted troops in the audience. And then on the stage, you had, a flag officer, the head psychiatrist for the base, other medical people, et cetera. And they explained what the policy is. And the policy is that, mental health, go get evaluated, go get treated. We're going to try to do everything we can to help you, to accommodate you. The psychiatrist said, we look for ways to keep people in the service through accommodation. We take every case one by one. It's individual. The only cases that are pretty much always going to be separated are bipolar disorder type 1, which is what I have, which, this high level mania, and schizophrenia. Everything else can be accommodated. That's what they said. Well, the troops aren't buying it.
I bet.
They are not buying it at all, because what they say is, hey, I hear you, General, Admiral, I hear you, Doctor Psychiatrist, but that is not reality down where at the deck plate or where the rubber meets the road. The truth is, if you're down there inside of a squad or a platoon and you say, I'm depressed, I need to go see the doctor, your first line NCO supervisor is going to say, what the heck is wrong with you? Do you look in this motor pool? Look at all these tanks and trucks we have to fix. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, we're already short, in a squad of 12, we're already short 2 guys, which means, that's 2 trucks or 2 tanks are not getting serviced and taken care of. And, we're getting ready to go on another deployment or another big training exercise. I can't afford to have you go see the doctor. And, you're depressed. Well, I'm depressed too. I got problems at home. I don't have enough money. My kids get in trouble. So suck it up and get your ass back in here. I mean, that's what happens. And it's not because the NCOs are mean. It's because they have enormous pressure on them to accomplish the mission and get things done. And so the higher up in the chain of command, the better everything looks and sounds.
That's the truth of a lot of things.
But as you go down the chain of command, there's problems. And a lot of the troops would say is, hey, look, I went once and then I showed up on this extra duty roster. And, all I did was go to the doctor, and now I've got extra duty at night, which is making me worse. Or, I got taken off the promotion list or whatever. So most troops see some kind of retribution, and they don't trust the system. And that's a cultural issue and a resource issue that's going to have to be addressed over time. And the military can't fix it overnight. But I will say, talking to a bunch of these psychiatrists who are the ones who trigger the medical review boards that decide if a person can stay in or not, they are actually retaining many troops that have all kinds of mental health issues. They basically say, look, this person has depression or PTSD or TBI or what have you. They have this condition, but are they doing okay? Can they live with it? Can they do their job? Are they on medication? Is there any problem with taking that? Are they under supervision? If they feel confident, they say retain and keep them on. Even people with bipolar disorder type 2, which is mostly depression and little blips of what they call hypomania, are being retained on active duty.
Probably reassigned after their diagnosis,
Probably.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Okay, so Bipolar General, folks can get this Amazon, wherever books are sold.
Yes.
Is there any other way that people can reach out? You'd like to connect with people who are interested in your work?
Yes. I have a webpage, and it's called bipolargeneral.com.
Perfect.
And the webpage has got, dozens of articles that I've written and published in a whole wide, a variety of publications. It's got dozens of podcasts and interviews and talks that I've given. So it's just loaded with information. And then there's other resources, organizations, nonprofits, businesses that specialize in this field, et cetera. So there's a lot of good information that's out there.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Devine, founder of SEALFIT and Unbeatable Mind, and I'm super stoked to announce that my new book, Uncommon, is due out from St. Martin's Press this summer, July 16th. And we've launched a pre-order campaign. You can learn more about that at readuncommon.com to try to get early awareness for the book, which I hope will help a lot of people, where I go and do a deep dive on the 5 mountains of personal mastery: physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual. Uncommon, simple principles for an extraordinary life. Check it out at readuncommon.com. And thank you for your support, and being part of the change that you want to see in this world. Hoo-yah. Divine out.
General Martin, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real honor, and thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's making an impact, a big one.
My pleasure, Mark. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for what you're doing. It's making a huge difference.
Hoo-yah.
Hoo-yah.